1967 was the year where it all started for rock. We had Sgt. Pepper, we had the Velvet Underground and Nico, and we had the Doors' first album. Now, the Doors have often been linked in with the Jefferson Airplane as the flag wavers of the West Coast counterculture. So the first album was obviously very important and one where they really wanted to make a mark. It's interesting that they actually recorded it in 2 weeks, and they recorded it with a producer that they hadn't met before, a guy called Paul Rothchild, who produced all but one of their albums. Turned out to be a marriage which Elektra Records made, but it was one that was made in musical heaven.
The Doors emerged at a time when there was a whole revolution going on. I mean, 1967 is always held up as the year when everything changed. Really, all the groundwork had happened in '66. That's when, the Beatles changed, which had a great effect. The Stones were starting to change, and over on the West Coast in America, they were slavishly copying English bands, as they always did, but then they used it as a kind of jumping off point. And you can't underestimate the input of LSD in all this, but one of the main bands doing the LA clubs at that time was Love, with Arthur Lee, and the Doors were fans of Love, and Love went from being they were always a bunch of hoodlums, and they went from being like an R&B punk band to getting very ornate and floral with their arrangements. So it was really down to individuals finding themselves in this new climate, which was breaking away from the initial UK invasion thing. And Jim Morrison, he met Ray Manzarek on the beach. Already had a song called Moonlight Drive, which he sang to Ray. And that was the first Doors song that was ever recorded. And it was unlike anything, really, because, you had four. It was the classic thing, again, of having four members of the group and you couldn't take one away, which was very, very much proved when Jim died and the Doors carried on. They had a chemistry, and that was evident on the album. The first thing the world heard about the Doors was Break On Through. That was the first single.
The drummer opens with a slight jazz riff. In comes the keyboards, kind of accenting with the drummer. To make that a little bit thicker, the guitar player mimics the keyboard player. Suddenly the song is starting to swell. It's waiting. Then all of a sudden a strange sound, like a moaning guitar or a moaning bass sound, just kind of goes in and out, kind of just making that sexual throbbing sound. And then the voice. Absolutely incredible. What a great way to open an album.
Break On Through was the first song on the album, and it really established the Doors as a non-flower power band. Many of the bands in the 60s, the Summer of Love was 67, were all about flower power, and this song was about a new journey. Many Doors fans know that a lot of their music was based on William Blake's poetry, his perception of going through doors to find out what's on the other side, which the Doors did. They did not want to follow the natural ways they should be doing things. They were non-government, non-conformists, and going through the door led their path, and that was about break on through to the other side of the door.
Doors of Perception, Aldous Huxley, classic Morrison, lyrics, short, sweet, big hit for the band, and will always remain a classic staple on rock radio. Love that song.
Break On Through, that was a song that the Doors performed a lot in the bars. And it's got a neat beat to it, very different. And that was the one song that Elektra was really pushing as their first single. So the first time that they did a tour up and down the coast here on the West Coast, that was a song they played a lot, and that was a song that they were pushing. And it did get a lot of radio airplay, but it wasn't until Light My Fire came out that's when everyone started taking notice of the Doors. But it's a really good song, and it's a great way to lead off the first album.
What's beautiful, I think, about the debut album by them is that it doesn't turn its nose up at the idea of pop music. The songs are lovely little 2-3 minute songs that could appeal as much to a teenage pop audience as to a rock audience. But within that, they've got this lovely literary quality. So both audiences could appreciate them. The kind of teenage fan girl audience could like them for their catchiness and for their sexiness. And the more rockier audience could appreciate them for their literary references and for the musicianship and so on. And I think this was to be one of the things that defined the Doors throughout their career, was this very clean sound and this thing of not being afraid, of being poppy, of being catchy.
Hesitate is through, no time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose, and our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. I just said the night out. Oh yeah.
Of course, Light My Fire was the first big Doors song. That would be the second single. In America, that was released as the full, 6.5 minute version, and they didn't edit it, and that was startling. No one released, well, Dylan had, but nobody really released singles that length with these amazing solos, and that kind of like, that was the template for the Doors sound already.
The song was originally 7 minutes long, but they had to make a single length, get it down to about 3 minutes time, which they cut out the keyboard solo and Robby Krieger's guitar solo.
When I talked to Krieger about Light My Fire, he said it was the first song that he ever wrote, because Morrison came back to them and said, I was tired of writing all of the songs, go and write a song. So he goes back to his place and thinks, well, geez, it's got to be a pretty heavy song. What is the topic? Like, okay, what's heavy? Earth, fire, water. Let me write about fire. Fire is pretty cool. So he goes and wants to sort of copy Hey Joe that Hendrix came out with. And then just one thing led to another, and boom, out came Light My Fire. First song he ever wrote.
When the Doors came out with Light My Fire, both on record and to the television audience and Ed Sullivan, they really presented themselves in a light that would have been very different had they done A Backdoor Man or When the Music's Over or The End or any of the other tracks that the Doors came out with. Because, let's face it, Light My Fire was a crooner's masterpiece. It could have been a Sinatra song, but it wasn't. It was this leather-clad rock and roll frontman named Jim Morrison, who was unlike any of the crooners that our parents grew up with. And yet it sounded like a crooner's song.
You know that I would be a liar.
The Ed Sullivan Show, a very popular TV show in North America in the 50s and 60s. Elvis, when he was on the show, they weren't allowed to show him from the waist down. They had family values. Well, it was the same. They asked Jim, please don't use the word higher. Can you say something else? Well, Jim, being the rebel that he is, got to the word and yelled it even louder for the TV audience.
Yeah, we couldn't get much higher.
probably first and last time that band was on Ed Sullivan.